Good morning, everyone. Today's webinar is Destination MTD, a practical roadmap. And we're going to be covering MTD and some practical tips and guidance to support you as we get closer to the mandation date. We'll start with an introduction to our cloud approach and then insights into MTD, timeline and a practical roadmap. We'll then have a discussion with Sarah, who's a partner in a firm that uses Wolters Kluwer software, to get her insights into the impact of MTD and approaches she's currently taking. Finally, I'll cover off an overview of what Wolters Kluwer's MTD solution is today and what we're currently working on. But first off, just a little housekeeping. So the session will run about 60 minutes. Feel free to ask any questions at any time in the Q&A panel. And there's a group chat facility as well if you just want to have a chat with other people. Session is being recorded and will be shared with you when we're finished. To start off with, though, just some quick introductions. My name is Mark Purdew. I am the manager who looks after the product team that's responsible for compliance products. So that's tax, that's accounts and audit. I've been with Wolters Kluwer just over 3 months, so not that long yet, but I have been in the industry, the tax and accounting software industry, for about 16 years. What I'll do now is if I hand over to Dorcas and Sarah so they can introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Dorcas Whitty. So I work closely with Mark on the product side. So I'm a senior product manager here at Wolters Kluwer, owning the strategic direction for our MTD solution, as well as our personal tax product suite. I've been in the industry for over 5 years now, working in various different product roles and various tax compliance needs, including VAT and also international SAFTI.
Hello, my name is Sarah Davey. I'm a partner in Edwards Green. We are a boutique tax practice based in Surrey, and we provide tax advisory and compliance services to high net worth individuals and large family groups. I have over 20 years experience in private client tax, and our firm is an end user of Wolters Kluwer products. And I'm involved with the sort of IT side of our practice, hence my involvement with our journey to making tax digital.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Dorcas. Before I cover off a bit about cloud and what we're doing at Wolters Kluwer, our first poll of the day is: how prepared do you feel for MTD? So if you could just take a few moments, be as honest as you like in terms of how prepared you feel. Okay, give a few more seconds. Okay, so as we can see, most people are feeling moderately or slightly prepared. There's one or two very bullish people who feel that they're extremely or very prepared, which is great. And equally, there's a couple of people who feel that maybe they're not at all prepared. So it's webinars like this that hopefully will give you that more confidence in terms of what MTD is, what the timeline is, and what Wolters Kluwer are doing to support you. That's great. Thank you. So if we now move on to the next slide. So what I'm now going to talk about is our cloud strategy at Wolters Kluwer. So as you all know, we currently have a desktop suite of software, and what we are working on is cloud products to complement and support that software. So we are currently best of breed. We have best of breed products across the suite, and we want to be mindful as we move to the cloud that we need to stay best of breed. We don't want to just do cloud products for cloud products' sake. API led, I won't delve too much detail of what APIs are, but what they are is they're the glue that connects different products together. So one advantage of being on the cloud is it's a lot easier to integrate with other products, whether that's an existing third-party product or whether it is even bespoke integrations. It's a lot easier when we're talking about cloud rather than on-premise products. And we use our own APIs. So any work we're doing today in terms of a data entry screen that you'll see when you use our MTD product, that's supported by an API, which means that we can get that data instead of somebody typing it in. We can get that data from elsewhere. Be mindful that Wolters Kluwer is a global company with global assets. So we are focused on MTD in the UK. That obviously is everyone's priority with April 2024 not that far away. But as our cloud suite builds out, we have access to products around the globe, and where they're appropriate for the UK, we will, rather than writing them from scratch, obviously, we will use assets we've already got. The fourth item here, customer efficiencies. And for me, this is the most important part of anything to do with cloud. If we lose sight of what cloud is supposed to achieve, and that is to be give you more accuracy, more productivity, reduce the stress, and save time, there's no point in going to cloud for cloud's sake. It's got to be benefits, and these are the main benefits we focus on. How we get there is one thing, but when we get there, it's really around those customer efficiencies, which everything else sort of leads to. And be mindful that customer experience, we've got world-class customer experience today, and that will continue. One advantage of cloud is we can bring that customer experience more into the product. So learning into the point where you need it, access to support at the point you need it, that type of thing. So I'm now going to hand over to Dorcas, who's going to give you a bit more information around MTD and what the timeline is.
Thanks, Mark. So I won't bore you with the whole entirety of what the timelines are. I think at this stage we're all quite familiar in terms of what HMRC's initiatives are. But what I will do is I'll dive into what the specific requirements are for making tax digital for income tax. So we're all aware that the government is rolling out MTD for its own stages, with the first phase coming into effect in April 2024. And will impact self-employed businesses and landlords with a total business and or property income of above 10,000 per year. And this is estimated to impact over 3.8 million taxpayers in the UK. Partnerships with individuals as partners will have to follow the rules from April 2025. Limited partnerships and partnerships with corporate partners will be required to join at a future date, and that's yet to be announced by HMRC. There are some categories that are exempt from making tax digital for ITSA, and these include trusts, estates, trusts of registered pension schemes, and non-resident companies, and some complex partnerships. So what does MTD mean for those impacted? The first phase of MTD for ITSA starts from April 2024. At this date, taxpayers will be required to keep digital records of income and expenses for each business and property. They'll be required to submit at least one quarterly update to HMRC via software. They'll be required to submit allowances and adjustments for each business with an end of period statement. And then they'll also be required to submit a final declaration. And this is essentially replacing the tax return that we all love today. What it doesn't mean is taxpayers or accountants need to submit a full tax return every quarter. I think this was the biggest assumption when MTD for its first launch or was first announced. It doesn't mean that all transactional data needs to be sent to HMRC. It doesn't also mean that HMRC needs to be able to drill back down to that transactional data. And lastly, it doesn't mean that quarterly tax payments are now required by taxpayers. The 31st of January deadline no longer applies. Again, that was one of the biggest assumptions that still exists with making tax digital for ITSA. Moving on to the practical roadmap on how to prepare your firm for making tax digital for income tax. As mentioned, there are a number of components that pave the journey to reach compliance for MTD. The first part of that journey is to understand if you or your clients meet the requirements set out by HMRC. If you do, then sign them up to making tax digital for income tax through the digital tax account via HMRC's website. As we continue our journey, we need to now ensure that we are maintaining digital records of income and expenses for each business and property. Quarterly submissions to HMRC is the next stop. The income and expenses figures should be calculated from original digital records, stored either by bookkeeping solutions or accounting software, or in spreadsheets, as that's still allowed. Taxpayers can choose to file more to HMRC if they feel it will help their accounting. HMRC hasn't yet set a limit on how many reports can be filed in a given quarter. A business that aligns to the tax year, the 6th of April to the 5th of April, will need to submit at least the following reports for the 24th till the 25th financial year. The first is due on the 5th of August. The second quarterly return will be due by the 5th of November. The third would be due by the 5th of February 2025, and the fourth quarterly submission will be due by the 5th of May 2025. Now that we've submitted all 4 quarters, it's time to prepare and find the end of period statements, or EOPS for short. EOPS is the process that allows the taxpayer to finalise their tax position for each trade or property business. This is equivalent to the current SA 103 and SA 104. SA 105 forms, excuse me. The EOPS is linked to the accounting period for each source of income. It cannot be completed until the end of the accounting period. However, the taxpayer does need to complete it until the 31st of January in year 2. Please note that at this stage, this is not enough to finalise your tax affairs. This is because the EOPS only covers one element of the taxpayer's income. To finalise your tax affairs, you will also need to submit the final declaration, and this covers not only your business income but also your personal income for taxpayers. And now we come to the last stage of the journey, the final declaration, or previously known as crystallisation. The final declaration brings together the details of all other factors. This includes business and non-business income, which will determine the taxpayer's final tax liability for the tax year. Unlike the quarterly submissions and EOPS, you only need to submit one final declaration per taxpayer, not per business. This is replacing the usual self-assessment tax return. Taxpayers must submit a final declaration by the 31st of January, following the end of the tax year. Once all these steps are completed, that's it. We've reached our destination of being MTD compliant. Now we'll move on to a conversation with Sarah, and I'll let Sarah introduce herself.
Hi Dorcas. So partner in Edwards Green, tax firm, so not primarily dealing in necessarily bookkeeping and accounting. We have a number of high net worth individuals and family groups where MTD for income tax is going to be an issue, whether it's through rental properties or self-employment, where it makes sort of a small part of the tax return. We're not big on number of clients, but the clients that we do have quite often have quite technical tax affairs. So it's making sure really that sort of the firm is prepared for the impact that MTD for income tax is going to have.
Thanks, Sarah. And I guess before we kick off, we've got one poll that I would like to run. So the poll is: select which of the following statements applies to you. We've had from several of our customers that there's multiple different scenarios where they'll be catering for their clients in regards to MTD. So submitting your end of periods or quarterly submissions and final declarations, or splitting it out and only submitting the end of periods and final declaration. So it'd be good to hear what the overall stance is. Brilliant. It seems like the large majority of firms on this webinar will be submitting all of the obligations for their clients, and then we've got a few who will be submitting just end of period statements and final declaration. So that's 33%. That's really great insights. So I guess with that, Sarah, what do you think firms need to think about now in preparation for MTD in April 2024?
I think firms need to think about their processes. I think the sort of new submissions are going to have different deadlines that you're perhaps not used to. You're going to need to do quarterly submissions, the end of period submissions. You need to think about staffing, how that sort of workflow is going to be dealt with. That's sort of a new aspect, particularly for us as a tax focused practice. We're used to sort of annual work for clients. So bringing that forward into sort of the quarters during the year is going to be something different. We need to think about possibly staffing levels and how we're going to manage that. The information that we're going to need to be able to prepare those quarterly submissions, how we're going to obtain that from clients, how that's going to be processed. I suppose on the client side of things, clients aren't necessarily going to be used to regular contact with us. That might be a new aspect, sort of more of an annual relationship previously is going to move to much more regular contact with them. We're going to be requiring information from them on a more regular basis. I'm sure everybody else's firm's clients are very good at providing information exactly on time and when you need it. But historically, there's always an issue sometimes with the provision of information and doing that on a timely basis. So I think you're going to have to extract this information from your clients 4 times a year, and then again for the final declaration. And I think you're going to have to think about the knock-on effect for billing that this sort of additional contact and additional work is going to have through the year. Probably going to need to look at engagement letters. That's something that perhaps sort of gets overlooked when you're looking at the minutiae of the detail, but making sure that your engagement letters reflect the MTD for income tax processes and responsibilities is going to be important. And I think I'm not sure that MTD for VAT is going to necessarily have prepared some clients for MTD for income tax. I think if you have a business with a turnover that's sort of approaching the VAT threshold, I think there's a certain expectation there that you're going to need to file reports with HMRC, and there's a certain expectation of a level of compliance that perhaps if somebody's sitting there with just over £10,000 of rental income, they're not necessarily expecting. So I think that quite a few clients are probably going to be surprised that they're caught by these new rules. And then I guess the last point is sort of the impact on technology. What software are you going to use for your MTD for income tax? Is it going to be different from the software that you may already have in place for MTD for VAT? How is it going to fit into your sort of software that you use for your final declaration? And in terms of your clients, are you going to be offering your clients sort of bookkeeping software? Are you going to be getting involved with that sort of that side of things? Are you going to be offering a new service line to clients? So I think all in all, you can sort of break it down into the component parts, but there's a lot of ground there to cover before we hit the sort of introduction of MTD for income tax.
Yeah, you mentioned several key points there, and we've been graced with MTD being delayed. I guess one of the call out messages there is there's a lot to consider when preparing for MTD, and you should be utilising some of this time to get a head start and preparing your firm quite early so that you can tick off answer some of these questions and get through some of this uncertainty. And I guess going back to the poll, there was a large majority of respondents there were slightly prepared, and I think it's elevating those slightly prepared to move up into the very prepared or extremely prepared throughout the year before the mandation period. I guess, how are you preparing your firm for MTD? What are some of the elements you're implementing?
So we're looking at sort of the workflow aspect of things and how we're going to deal with that. So the quarterly submissions, the end of period submissions and the final declaration, sort of considering who's going to be preparing those, who's going to be reviewing those, what level of detail, sort of accuracy are we going to be going into with those. I think sort of common with the MTD for VAT, there's sort of an underlying thought out there, I think, amongst people that perhaps quarterly submissions don't need to be entirely accurate, that you can tidy them up as you go along. And I'm sure that HMRC may well be proposing a soft landing for MTD for income tax, but how long that will last for, I'm not really sure. And as a sort of a firm of accountants, it sort of goes against the grain to not be preparing accurate figures, but it's going to depend on what information you're going to be able to get from the client and in what format that information is going to be. And then it's pulling it all together into the final declaration. So your more traditional elements of the tax return, so your gift aid and your investment income and your pensions and how that's all going to slot together. And obviously you're going to have done a lot more of the work throughout the year, sort of doing rental and business income on the quarterly submission. So that part of the sort of final declaration process may have been accelerated earlier on into the year, but you're still going to need to do a bulk of work to get that sort of final declaration ready for submission to HMRC. I think obviously the knock-on effect of all of that is that your work in progress throughout the year might be higher than it would otherwise have been. You're going to be accelerating work throughout the year. And I think you're going to need to, certainly as a firm, we're thinking about whether we need to introduce quarterly payments on account, just to try and spread that for the client with perhaps a final catch-up bill at the end. And I think to some extent, it's going to be a hard sell initially for clients, because as far as the client's concerned, they've got the same sources of income, they've got the same levels of income, but suddenly you're doing, you know, more work on their affairs than you would otherwise have been, and that's inevitably going to need to increase their fee. So it might be that we need to look at whether there's any kind of discounts or incentives that we can offer to clients to try and sort of soften the blow of that. I'm not sure if perhaps if you add an additional service line, obviously, that you take on the bookkeeping or reviewing the bookkeeping and helping with clients sort of maintaining their digital records. Obviously, that's an extra service and there'll be an expectation there of an increased fee. But if the client's happy to sort of retain that bookkeeping function, it's sort of finding that line as to how best to, you know, introduce and sort of soften the blow of an increased fee for what the client might perceive on their side of things as being the same work.
Yeah, it's about that perception of value, isn't it? To justify the fee increase, and the value that I'm hearing is the additional touch points with customers, as well as the additional work required to get the elements and obligations ready for submitting. I guess it also helps with the kind of backlog that accountants have today in terms of, you know, the compliance period. I guess in terms of incentivizing customers on the fee increase, is there a way to kind of incentivize customers to get on board with MTD?
It's a difficult one. I'm not sure that we've sort of used incentives historically for tax return purposes to try and encourage clients to provide information in a timely manner to ensure that we meet sort of 31 January deadlines. And there will be a group of clients who will be incentivized by a discount on their fee, or, you know, perhaps a holding of their fee level, notwithstanding that you're doing MTD for the first time. But I think for sort of a large section of clients, there's not probably going to be much that you can do on the fee front. So it's going to be about, you know, the presentation of, as you say, the added value that they're receiving. And I think, as well as the extra touch points for clients, it's probably also worth mentioning to clients that actually it gives you more opportunity to review their information, and you can sort of pick up on any issues or problems that their business may be facing, or problems with their sort of digital records, just a lot earlier than you would otherwise be able to do if you were looking at things on an annual basis. So I think it's important to focus on some of the positives of MTD for income tax.
Yeah, and it's a great point that you mentioned that. I think there's been a lot of negativity from firms and from taxpayers alike around what's the benefit to them with this initiative. But I guess what you're saying there is that you can flip it on its head, and there are a lot of positive impacts that MTD can have for firms as well as taxpayers itself, in terms of adding growth and also providing a deeper connection and a deeper service to your customers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how are you identifying clients impacted by MTD?
So that's probably the hardest part from our side of things of this whole thing. I think that's probably a common theme, or I would expect it to be a fairly common theme throughout our industry, is trying to identify what clients are going to be affected and how you actually go about doing that. It seems to be sort of one of the biggest issues. And I think initially, before we sort of narrow down into the clients that are going to be specifically impacted, you probably just need to raise awareness about MTD for income tax more. So I think this is sort of the getting to the time, notwithstanding the sort of delays that we've had. I think we've hit the crunch point, and we just need to accept that the deadline's probably going to stick where it is now, and go about raising the profile of MTD for income tax and putting it on our clients' radar. So I think as a firm, we're looking to do sort of a very high level, probably email circular, just to do the headlines, the main points, the who's going to be affected, the timings, and the broad outline of what it's going to do. And I think if you've got social media platforms for your firms, then sort of get messages out on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, all of those sort of social media channels that can just help to raise awareness that this is an issue that's coming up for clients. And I think sort of a lot of the sort of Gen Z clients who have sort of set up businesses and start up businesses, that's going to be a great way of reaching out to them. The other sort of side of it is making sure that your website's up to date, making sure that perhaps you've got something on there, some blogs, some news, just anything really to sort of raise awareness of sort of the impending impact that MTD might have on your clients. I think once you've raised a general awareness, you're then sort of moving into a more targeted approach with your individual clients. And I think we're looking at what reports we can run from within our software to identify whether people have got trading income and whether they've got rental income. And so hopefully sort of by running these reports, we'll be able to identify the core of people that are affected. And I think it's probably a good idea to, once you've identified who's affected, is to segment them into sort of the different types of client that you've got. So you're going to have your clients who are sort of the low hanging fruit. They're already doing MTD for that. They've already got digital record keeping. They're already using software perhaps to maintain their records as it is, and you might be just doing the MTD for that part of things. Those people, those clients are going to be ready and set to go for MTD for income tax. There's probably not going to be much that they need to do. So they're going to be a real, the sort of the easier clients to deal with. And then you're going to have sort of the middle ground and the opposite end of the scale where they might have some spreadsheets, they might have manual records, and you're going to have to really sort of target those clients and help them get their record keeping in a format that's going to be acceptable for digital records. It might be that they're the sort of clients that you're going to need to offer a new service line to for bookkeeping or reviewing their bookkeeping. And whilst a client might have been keeping their records on Excel spreadsheets or some rudimentary software for quite a while, whether that client will be confident enough to sort of allow a quarterly submission off the back of the records that they're keeping may not be the case. They might want you to review that information. I think that's one of the sort of the points where you can add value to your relationships with your clients. And I think once you've identified and segmented your clients into the different types, you can then really focus on approaching them and tailoring the assistance and the advice that you're giving them. And I guess you've just got to make clients aware of things like accounting periods, how do they line up with the MTD for income tax, deadlines. I think there's some sort of chain of thought about whether you start to think about whether you need to change accounting periods now. I think HMRC have said there's no rush to do that, but it's going to depend. If you can chip away at some of these things, it might be easier sort of come 2024. And I guess you also need to think about whether the clients are currently receiving the information that you're going to need to be able to prepare the quarterly submissions and the end of period submissions, whether they're receiving that information from third parties directly. Is it set up for quarterly? Do they receive that information biannually? Do they receive it annually? So does the client need to be doing stuff behind the scenes to get their ability to provide you with information and their record keeping into a format that is going to be conducive to you doing the quarterly submissions? I think there's a lot really for clients to sort of get used to, and the more aware they are that that's going to be happening, I think the better, and the more time you can put into sort of helping the clients that are going to need the real help with switching to digital records.
Yeah, from the sounds of it sounds like a mammoth task from a firm's perspective, but I think the key message there is segmentation being highly paramount to the success, because it's not communicating with all of your clients in one fell swoop. It's that educational piece goes off in one fell swoop, and then you break up your clients by complexity and then target those less tech savvy individuals who might need a little bit more guidance and servicing around digitalizing their invoices or records and adopting technology versus the ones who already have it done and dusted, like you mentioned, because they've gone through MTD or they're just technically savvy individuals, where you can kind of postpone that communication because you know they're already up to speed in terms of some of the MTD requirements. I guess one of the things I've been hearing from customers around contacting clients is the risk element of fear mongering and kind of scaring off your clients with this additional service and requirement. What would be your advice to customers who are a bit apprehensive to contact their customer base now?
I think it's really going to be based on your approach to it. I think if you focus on some of the positive elements of MTD for income tax, you focus on the clients that are going to need the most help, and you don't overwhelm them with some of the details, but just sort of go in initially with the impact, the sort of overview of what it's going to mean for them, and then you can drill down into some of the sort of the more nitty-gritty aspects, such as their digital record keeping. But I think if you break it down into smaller parts for the client, not only are you sort of adding value and becoming, it's that phrase, isn't it, their trusted advisor, but it's also sort of making the client aware of what you're doing to help them and not making it sort of a big negative issue. It's making it seem less daunting for the client. But I think while the temptation is perhaps to put it off, I think we have reached that stage where we just need to take action now. And if you haven't already done so, start at least in a very high level way raising this issue with your clients, because it seems like a long way away, but it really isn't.
Yeah, no, that's some great advice. Thank you, Sarah. I think it's a great time for us to break and do another poll. So our third poll is around, do you expect to see an increase in your service fees for MTD? If yes, do you have a rough estimate of how much this will be? Yeah, so we've got a majority, 68%, are saying yes, but they don't know how much it would be. And I think that's an ongoing discussion firms are having in terms of what that price increase looks like. And we've got a few firms who are going to be increasing their fees by 30%. If we go back to our questions, and it kind of rolls in quite nicely around what we was talking about, the technological elements of MTD. So what considerations do firms need to have when it comes to new technology for themselves and for their clients?
The biggest issue is going to be what software you're going to be using to meet your MTD for income tax obligations. So I guess that was sort of the starting point for thinking about our firm's preparedness for MTD for income tax. And I attended Accountex in London back in the spring, and that was sort of the first time that I'd really had a discussion with you guys about software and what that MTD for income tax software was going to look like. And I think that was the point at which sort of we spoke about the beta testing program that you're running on your MTD for income tax software, and I was very keen to sort of get on board with that. I think it's important to make sure that you make it real. So the technology side of it is when you sort of it becomes more of a reality. It seems like a sort of a distant thing at the moment. When you've got something that's like a beta testing software for MTD for income tax, it makes the reality a lot more real. And I think having something that is, there was almost something sort of comforting and familiar about seeing a product that's not dissimilar to something that you already use, and how MTD for income tax is going to look and how that's all going to slot together. I think that for me personally, MTD for income tax software was sort of a thing floating around that I didn't really have much feel for how like the quarterly submissions were going to sort of fit together to make the end of period submissions, and then how that was all going to link into the final declaration. And I think particularly for sort of my firm's point of view, we have a high tax focus. So the tax returns that we do for clients, the MTD for income tax element of it might just be a small part. And so we use, a whole suite of software, and we run investment portfolios, and they all import into our current sort of personal tax software. When you're thinking about what products you're going to use for your MTD for income tax, you've probably already got a solution in place for MTD for VAT, and it's kind of working out how it's all going to slot together. And I think a lot of perhaps some of the software that is out there for MTD for VAT are saying we can do MTD for income tax, that's no problem. And there's quite a lot, I think, of software providers that are really pushing that market at the moment. But sort of what I've found is actually you need to think about what your requirements are when it comes to your final declaration as well. So for us, it's making sure that we've got the product for MTD for income tax that still fits with sort of our very tax focused approach for our clients. So I think it's making sure that you've got software that integrates properly into other software and that everything's compatible. And I think making sure that you've got making the most really of sort of new opportunities for technology. So it might be that you think about doing some direct bank feeds. It might be that you've got sort of viewing and editing abilities into your client's bookkeeping software. It could be that you've got sort of direct access to information through third parties, through letting agents, all of those sorts of technologies that mean that the information that you're getting is coming directly from a third party and in the most efficient way possible into your software. And in that way, it has the benefit to the client that you're not sort of trying to get this information from them. I think the most that you can utilize technology and try and use new technologies to get this information directly and into your software has got to be beneficial. And then I think you also need to think about the client side of the software. So do they have any bookkeeping software at the moment? What are they using for their record keeping? Can you provide perhaps software to them, help them with training them on that software? Can you point them in the direction if that's not something that your firm does? Can you point them in the direction? It's really just sort of knowing how all of those components are going to slot together, and how if they're using external software for their digital record keeping, that's going to then fit into your whatever solution you're going to pick for MTD for income tax.
Yeah, and I think the key word there is compatibility, isn't it? You don't really want to, as a firm, utilising disparate systems to do your MTD solution. You essentially want one MTD software that can support all of the obligations set out by HMRC, and for that to be used as a central source of truth. So having your bookkeeping solution, your rental statements from agencies coming in and storing it in that central area. So within CCH, we've created that's kind of the strategy we're going for, is having a MTD solution that can be API driven, like Mark said, to connect to all of these third party solutions so that it can be a central hub for all of your MTD needs. And we'll go into a bit more detail in terms of what our MTD solution is offering. And just a quick question for me, how can firms engage with technology if they aren't that tech savvy?
I think really it's speaking to people who are tech savvy. If you're not that way inclined yourself, it's consulting with your IT specialist, whether it's your internal IT department or external IT consultants. It's speaking to your software providers. It's just having a look around and seeing what's out there. And I think if you have a software provider and you can approach them and they have something like a beta testing program, I think it's invaluable to get on board with that sort of thing early, and really it gives you an opportunity to get to grips early with what is going to be required of you. And I think also don't lose sight of the fact that you're probably going to have staff who feel perhaps the same way. Some staff will quickly embrace new technology, and you might have some members of staff who are a bit slower and a bit more reluctant to sort of pick up on the new technology. So I think you've got to allow a real period of time for new software to be sort of bedded in, and for staff to become familiar with it, and for them to become competent and confident in using it. So I think talk to people. If you're tech savvy yourself and you know what you're doing, go and speak to your software provider. If you're not, speak to external IT people, IT departments, and just really have a conversation about what you need from your software, and how you're going to train your staff, and just get feedback, but start the process now. I think that's the important part.
Yeah, especially the upskilling of staff. I think that's going to be key to get them to a level they're comfortable with, so it's not it's just completely secondhand for them to go into a new software and do all of the relevant pieces for their clients. You mentioned a few times around our beta program and also HMRC's pilot scheme. Will you and your firm be participating in the programs?
Yeah, so the great part about being part of your beta testing program is that you get the opportunity to take part in the HMRC pilot program, and I think we're in the process of selecting some suitable clients that sort of are kind of gently in on the MTD for income tax. I think approaching those clients and getting them on board early, the pilot program is giving you the opportunity really to kind of provide feedback and to shape how it works. And it's nice, it will be nice to see what goes to HMRC, how that all works, what HMRC has kind of receive and become familiar with that whole process. And I think if you can do small bits now and sort of participate in a fairly sort of low key way, I think it's going to give you more confidence and make the whole switch in 2024 seem less daunting.
Yeah, and it just goes back to a key point that you mentioned. It makes MTD feel more real, actually getting involved with a segment of the process. This is a good time for us to jump into our fourth poll. I'll be interested to see how many of you guys will be participating in HMRC's pilot program. And realistically, when do you envision yourselves taking part? Okay, we're getting some interesting results. So the large majority are looking to enrol after April 2023. And I think alluding to our earlier poll around MTD readiness, that makes a lot of sense given the majority were slightly prepared for it. So it gives you a lot more time to get yourselves ready before joining the pilot. Thank you so much for participating in the poll. So in terms of summarising some of the key points that Sarah mentioned around getting your firm and yourselves prepared for making tax digital, there are essentially four key steps to take away from today. The first being to assess the impact on your clients. So clearly understanding the extent to which your practice as well as your clients are already compliant with the MTD mandate. So that being, do they have digital records? Do they currently use digital software like bookkeeping solutions? What additional technologies do you as a firm need to employ to become MTD ready for your clients? Within the Waters Clearer solution, our personal tax product, we've got an MTD for ITSA report, which you can run to begin to identify those clients impacted by MTD and build that communications list. The second step is to decide your approach. So this is the level of change which you as a firm is comfortable with to meet the requirements set out by HMRC. So this is the extent to which you want to employ digital software and solutions. How deep do you want to go in terms of integrations with some of these third-party solutions? These are all questions that need to be answered. The third step is to build MTD isn't all doom and gloom. It does have its positives, one of them being the capabilities to actually allow your practice to build growth around MTD, because it allows you to have a lot more touch points with your clients as you previously never had before. So instead of probably reaching out maybe 3 times or once a year to get information for the tax return, you're touching base with clients a lot more frequently. You're understanding their needs a lot deeper, and there's a greater opportunity for more work and services to be added on to provide value to your clients. And then lastly, it's reviewing your options around technology and what implementations need to take place before the mandate. So having more broader holistic approach to technology and discovery, deciding on your vendor for MTD, as well as what other compatible software and integrations that you need to have in order to make the MTD process as efficient as possible, because again, it's a lot more data, it's a lot more touch points, and you want the process to not be clunky or bulky. You want to have it structured and as seamless as possible. So I'll hand it over to Mark, who will talk about our solution.
Thank you, Dorcas. So yeah, what I'd like to cover off now is thinking about what Dorcas was just saying about a practical roadmap and the steps of where MTD takes you. If we could have the next slide, I'd like to cover off where on that journey we are. So in terms of what we've done, what we're currently working on, and what's coming next. So thinking about Dorcas's, I say, that practical journey, quarterly updates is the first step. Well, actually, there is a step before that I've not got on the slide, which is if you approach HMRC for a client that you're not authorised for, then there's an authorisation process. So they hand back into our software a link which you can then share with the client. So if you've got a client who's not yet authorized within our software, you can do that authorization journey. But assuming it's a client that you already act for and is authorized, then what we now have today is quarterly updates for trading income, quarterly updates for property income. As Sarah mentioned and as Dorcas has touched on, we've already been doing beta submissions. And what I've got there is supporting workspace. If we imagine that the MTD is going to be in the cloud for Waters Clear. So that cloud workspace where you as a user log in, where you get your client from on-premise up to cloud to do MTD, we've got that supporting workspace in place at the moment as well. What we're currently working on is towards the end of that journey on that practical roadmap, which is the end of period statements for trading income and property income, and also that final declaration. So we're working on the SA 103 and 105 equivalent, and then of course the SA 100, that final declaration, which can sort of be viewed as the SA 100. And that final declaration, we're focusing on areas which certainly for the pilot we feel are have the highest value in terms of getting clients into the pilot, which is bank interest, is dividends, and then gift aid and pension contributions. So for early next year, when we're going to be looking for pilot participants, we're widening out the pilot participants, it's going to be easier for you to find a client who's suitable for the pilot if they're a sole trader or a landlord and they've got bank interest, dividends, gift aid, etc. So that's our primary focus. Be mindful though that MTD ultimately, for those clients impacted by MTD, it does replace the SA return as you know it today. So MTD will cover that full scope of what an SA return is today for an individual. And I would say I can't really go into too much more detail because this is partially dependent on HMRC delivering on their roadmap. We have APIs in place already that we know are there that we can start interacting with, but there are certain elements on their roadmap that don't yet have a date against them. So our rollout is going to be partly dependent on that as well. But that's where we are and what we're doing. So if you are interested in taking part in the pilot, we are going to be looking for a handful of pilot participants this year. We're in a position now where we can do that first pilot submission to HMRC, whether it's this year or whether you want to get things lined up for April next year, then please get in touch with us, whether it's via your account manager. We've not got any formal process in place yet, but get in touch via your account manager so we can get an idea of how much interest there is in taking part in the pilot. So in support of everything we've spoken about today, there is an ebook, so you can scan that QR code, and when I'm sure the recording of this goes out, there'll be a link to it as well, and you can download the ebook. Okay, so you've got that as well. So finally, it's questions and answers, and I think we have a few questions that have come in, so I will just start at the top and work my way down. Question from Karen is, when will WatersClear software be going into the cloud? How agile will it be interacting with other accounts, production software / rental income software? So MTD, the MTD software you'll be using with WatersClear will be in the cloud. It will be integrated into your on-premise tax today. So if you imagine you're in, let's say, Central, you've got a tax client, and instead of doing self-assessment, you want to do MTD, then that journey is going to be there to take you into the cloud with all that client information so you can do your MTD submission. I spoke at the beginning about APIs and our plan for integrating our software via APIs to third-party software. So it is our approach. We're going to have these APIs which are going to be available to other providers to interact with. So we will be interacting with other providers. They'll be able to interact with us. So our immediate focus is getting over the challenge of the Excel client. So that's what our focus is at the moment. Acknowledging we've all got clients who aren't in the bookkeeping products and just do Excel. So our quarterly submission process today is via that Excel spreadsheet and importing the data. But very much before mandation, we will have integrations with other accounting products as well. The next question, which is anonymous, how do you see your system operating where a tax agent is only responsible for the end of period statement and final declaration, where a bookkeeper or the client is undertaking the quarterly submission? HMRC have indicated only one agent can interact on behalf of the client. Yeah, so there's actually two questions there. So I'll deal with the client one first. So if the client is doing the quarterly submission via their bookkeeping product, then within the WatersClear product, we will be able to call HMRC and find out what data has been submitted by that other product. Okay, so the client is the client, you're the agent, so we can bring that data back into WatersClear software so you can look at it, and also part of any end of period statement and final declaration, you've got that quarterly data. Where there is still a challenge, and this is with HMRC, I'll be honest, is HMRC only allow one third party to interact on behalf of a client for a tax heading, if you like. So for MTD, for ITSA, there can only be currently one agent. So there's nothing we can do about that. If the client engages a bookkeeper to do the quarterly submissions and the bookkeeper authorizes themselves first, when you authorize yourself as the end of period statement, chances are that will knock out the bookkeepers. So there can only be one active client for a head of service with HMRC. So that is something HMRC is aware of, is a limitation, but until they resolve that, there's no way for us as a provider to allow you and a bookkeeper to interact on the same client. Third question is, when does CCH think the time would be right for firms to enter the pilots? I'll give my view on this, and Sarah and Dorcas, feel free to chip in as well. I think that really is down to you as a firm, how, and also the type of clients you have. So the key thing about you taking part in the pilot is finding, let's call them a willing victim of a client to take part in the pilot as well. Someone who's prepared to take those extra steps that are necessary a year before it's mandated. So I think really it's down to your appetite to take part and finding that client who's got the appetite to take part as well. My own personal view is that you should take part as soon as you're comfortable to take part, because there's going to be quite a few learnings, new processes and new procedures that you need to learn. Dorcas, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I'd completely agree with that, Mark. I think it's in terms of when to participate, it should be driven more so from you as a firm to kind of reach out to, like Mark said, some willing victims who want to participate, to try and get your processes in place ahead of the mandate. I've heard of a few, again, tech savvy, MTD conscious clients who have reached out to firms to get themselves on board, because for them they're already doing things digitally, so it doesn't hurt to get in advance, but it should primarily be driven by firms. So if you as a firm feel comfortable that you're ready to take part, I think you should start reaching out to those clients who you feel meet the requirements to participate, to then get involved.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so the next question is, do I understand your comments correctly? MTD clients will be in your cloud solution. How do we continue to process non-MTD clients? So yes, but let me clarify. All of your clients will still be in your current software, in your on-premise CCH, personal tax or central. But that MTD process will be in the cloud. So what we will do at the point that you've got a client in your current database and it needs to be an MTD, we don't move it and remove it from your on-premise database. What we do is we effectively copy it and then keep it in synchronized between the cloud and on-premise, so that you do that MTD elements of that client's journey in the cloud. So other non-MTD clients will still be exactly the same as they are today. What I've not touched on in any detail today is, even though our focus in the short term is MTD in the cloud, we will be able to, in the future, deal with self-assessment in the cloud. And also we're looking at accounts and every other aspect of what you do today on premise, you will over time be able to do in the cloud. So there will come a point when all of your workflows, if you want them to be, will be in the cloud rather than on premise. But certainly the MTD submission processes will be via the cloud, yes. Okay, now Martin has asked, can we book demonstrations of CCH MTD solutions so that we can see how they work before we start selecting solutions for clients? Definitely. So what we're in the process of doing towards the end of this year, well in time for that April 2023 kickoff of the pilot, and certainly well in time of the April 2024 mandation date, is getting into a position so on our website there will be an end-to-end video demonstration of what MTD would look like for a Wolters Kluwer user. And then on top of that, obviously get in touch with your account manager and sales nearer the time, and we can talk about what MTD looks like, and we can arrange one-to-one demos as well. But there will be all of that information on our website nearer the time. Thank you for your time. I hope you found that useful. And if you think of any questions afterwards, then please get in touch with us and we will do our best to answer your questions. Thank you.